Hello and welcome to this special edition of Greater Somerville. I'm Joe Lynch. Joining me on this program is the Mayor of the City of Somerville, Joe Curtatone, and the Chief of Police of the city, Dave Fallon. The highly publicized events that took place in Ferguson, Missouri, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, and elsewhere have once again brought front and center wide-ranging discussions about race relations in the United States. We here at SCATV believe these are important discussions to have with our own local officials, our residents, and our business community. To that end, Greater Somerville plans to produce and air 3 special segments addressing the issues of race relations in our city of Somerville in 2015. This, our first segment with the mayor and the police chief, will concentrate on the current race relations climate as they see it, the available data to support or refute public perceptions, and some discussion about whether or not the unrest witnessed in other parts of the country could happen here in Somerville. The next program to air will concentrate on the black and non-white experience here in Somerville, not only from an historical perspective, but from the experiences of current-day residents and businesses. And our third program will concentrate on the educational system and how it serves or does not serve all students, white, black, immigrant, and non-white community. Please check the local listings in the newspapers and on SCATV's website for airing dates. To begin our first discussion, it is my pleasure to welcome back to our studios Mayor Joe Curtatone and Police Chief Dave Fallon. Gentlemen, welcome back to SCATV.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You've both been here many times over the years, so thank you for coming back. Joe, you know I have many, many questions. You know me well enough. But what I would like to do is to turn this opening to you, talk about the incidents that we've seen play out on the national media for a bit in relation to our city here, Somerville.
Well, thanks for having this conversation. I recently wrote an article for Commonwealth Magazine entitled Lessons from Ferguson and How It Could Happen Here in Massachusetts Anywhere. And what you've seen in Ferguson and what we're witnessing in Baltimore and what we don't even hear about around the country are important lessons to be learned when you have an institutional government or a society or a police force that doesn't know its community or care to listen to it, or when a certain segment of their community is depressed in terms of having lack of access to great housing and health care and education, and where that community may make up the majority of a particular racial demographic or ethnic demographic of the city and is not well represented. I think over time, that combustible atmosphere percolates. And then there's an incident, something happens to spark civil unrest. And we saw that in the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. We've seen that and what is happening in Baltimore in protests because of Staten Island. And there's so many more we don't even hear about. This could happen anywhere where we're not vigilant to these important lessons of society. This can happen here if we do not continue to make social progress as well as economic progress. And it will happen if we don't understand that we as policymakers and as a police force problem solvers. We need to be engaged, we need to know, and we need to care to listen to them.
Thank you, Joe. You know, Dave Fallon is recently appointed the new chief, and I thought it would be advantageous for both of you to start off this series of programs. We are 3 white guys sitting here talking about race relations in the city of Somerville, but I think we can add something to that conversation because all 3 of us grew up in this city during this, in my case, the 60s, 70s, you guys in the coming out of the high school system. Let's talk a little bit, and we can frame it for the viewing public, and talk about what it was like in each of your experiences growing up in this city when it came to race relations, when it came to the education system, and what you experienced at Somerville High School.
Sure. I graduated Somerville High a little after you, Joe, in '84, but I grew up in the Prospect Hill neighborhood, and Somerville was socially and ethnically rich because we were then, as we are now, a city of immigrants. And I grew up in a neighborhood we were kids of families that came directly from Ireland or Portugal or Italy or Greece. But racially, we were part of a segregated Greater Boston region. So as a kid, I mean, I saw and experienced some of that segregation. It was certainly, there was certainly a tone and a visual experience when you went to other neighborhoods in the area, either in Somerville or in Boston, like Charlestown. In high school, in the school system, there were very few kids that didn't look like us. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they were my friends, and, you know, and they lived in a certain part of the city, and we played sports together, but we didn't have the diverse and rich diversity we have today. And I recall a certain incident in high school. I was explaining this to you outside, and I remember my senior year, you know, after school, witnessing a powerful, sad moment, which should have been an indicator for things to come, where we had a fight between white students and new immigrants from Haiti, who were just good kids, were isolated in the school, and a community that really at that time didn't undertake the opportunity to listen and care and understand what this meant, what this change in demographic meant, and how we are all one school community. And there was an incident involved between a Haitian student and a white student, and that escalated to an all-out brawl from the school. And then the series of incidents in the coming years afterwards.
But setting the stage, you're talking about that goes as far back as the 80s.
In my experience, sure. But I've seen it's even before in this region. We know that.
Oh, yeah, sure. And Chief, you were a couple of years ahead of Joe.
Yes, yep. And you know, my high school experience at summer high school, it was a great experience. I mean, probably very similar to the mayor's, attending school. My parents, I grew up on Hudson Street. My parents still reside today. And just where we turned on the Hudson Street, and everybody in the community, you know, were sons and daughters of immigrants, and it was just a great experience playing sports outside in the street, and just really, you know, when I think back of those days, it's a very, very positive experience for me.
Yep. And just, you know, from my own experience, I did not attend Somerville High School, but I was thinking back. I went to school in Cambridge for a parochial school, and I tried to remember how many black kids were in my graduating senior class. And I often find it ironic that there were 5. In the city of Cambridge, in the 70s, there were 5. And we happen to think, Joe knows my liberal leanings, we happen to think that there could be no better president of the senior class than the black kid named Stephen Douglas. And that's who we elected as the president. So, you know, it's a perspective that I think we can, as 3 white guys, we can give to the city, which is now enormously diverse.
Yes, 52 languages. Yeah.
Things have changed. Mm-hmm. They have changed. And I'm going to leave it up to, you know, us to kind of guide that conversation on how things have changed. There are future programs where there are some folks in this city who still feel as though it's not enough. But we're going to address basically the framework of what Somerville is today. So let's kind of move on to the current environment. Mayor, if you could, give the snapshot of our demographics today.
Sure. As a city, a third of our population is foreign-born and does not speak English as the first language, which is one of the things we love about Somerville. We, in fact, speak 52 languages in our neighborhoods, in our schools. And I think that really adds to what is an eclectic, a creative, and original community, and to the values we hold dear. In fact, when the community came together over a 3-year period to develop Summer Vision, a comprehensive plan for the future of not what we're going to build, but who we're going to be. And we wanted to sort of define our values, our DNA. We want to be an exceptional place to live, work, play, raise a family for everyone. But we did this incredible wordle. And the values that pop out right at diversity, multiculturalism, you know, the soul of who we are in this city.
So what's our black or non-white population in terms of our 80,000 residents?
I think it reflects somewhat, you know, what we're seeing. I mean, again, a third of our population is foreign-born, and in terms of what's non-white, it's somewhere probably less than 20%, around there.
As opposed to what we see on the national news,
Right.
with Baltimore being well over 60%.
And Ferguson was 90, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And I, you know, as I've looked at, seen those demographics change. In my position, I kind of like this conversation reflected back when I grew up. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, what's the difference then and now? It's like, you know what? What was great about Somerville then, it wasn't as clean. It was very corrupt. as we know.
We know.
But the neighborhoods were socially rich.
Right.
What's fantastic today, they're even more robust and rich in terms of the social fabric. And in the city, physically, in its operation, its administration has certainly evolved. But we're not done yet in terms of where we want to go as a community.
Chief, growing up in the city, I remember when it was an all-white, all-male police
Yes.
force. What have you got today in terms of your makeup?
Yeah, I think, with the leadership of the city, half of our officers now are bilingual, just about half. About 20% of our officers in our patrol force are black. A big Hispanic population within the patrol force, and we're moving towards increasing. We have 9 officers entering the academy in May, and 4 of them are going to be female. Yeah. And we're very proud of that. But, if I'm a policing perspective, we're thinking about it intently in the police department. We're looking at Ferguson, where I believe only 3 officers are black, but Baltimore has a majority-minority police force. So we realize that regardless of the makeup of the police department, it can happen anywhere. I mean, we have a mandate from the mayor to be transparent of what we do at the Somerville Police Department, and it's vitally important. And engagement. We engage with community. I mean, here we are in Somerville having this conversation before something happens. Vitally important.
Yeah, we undertook over the last, as you know, Joe, you witnessed over the last decade plus a transformation and reformation of the police department. We do not want to be a military reactive or arresting force. We have to be problem solvers. Every officer needs to be engaged with everyone in the community to care to know them, to care to listen to them. Let's solve issues before they become problems or crimes. The wrong indicator of success used to be how many arrests we made. Mm-hmm. That's an indication of failure.
I'm glad you brought it up, because the national press, CBS News and all the rest of them are starting to come down hard on Martin O'Malley, the prior mayor of Baltimore, who instituted a policy, there's multiple names for it, stop and search or broken windows or however you want to label that. In the context for our viewers, crime was at an all-time high in Baltimore. O'Malley came in as saying, I'm going to clean up the streets for the majority of the residents. The criticism that he's now getting, even though crime dropped by 40%, is that the policy that he instituted has somehow fueled or added gasoline to the fire of the unrest that erupted in Baltimore. You're the mayor, you're the chief. How does you balance that kind of a policy and have the foresight to say this thing may backfire on me?
Well, I actually know Martin O'Malley. He's a friend, and I don't agree with that assertion from the media. One, the problems we have, the societal problems, the lack of social progress in the country are generational. They didn't happen overnight. We've invested in that lack of progress. And we need to understand that while the United States ranks near the top in GDP, in social progress, we rank 16th in the world. Mortality rates, health rates, access to economic opportunity. That's what you're seeing in these cities. Martin O'Malley did a tremendous amount to put in place generational reforms to give everyone that equal opportunity. But no mayor is going to do that in 4 years or 8 years. But in terms of what that means for us is to understand is what are the values that guide us. It's not going to be just reforming the police department. It's not going to be just having the greatest analytical capacity in a city administration to deliver services. Do our residents feel that life is worth living here, no matter where they're from?
It's interesting you bring it up, because a couple of the residents from Baltimore, when O'Malley was first running for mayor, said to him point blank during the debates, tell us why we should stay in Baltimore. Crime is at an all-time high.
It was the most dangerous place in America at the time. Exactly.
So if you were faced with it, I guess the question is, for any big city mayor, not just yourself, Joe, if you were faced with a 40% or a 45% crime rate, and you only saw that trajectory going up, is that the right policy to employ? Is if you show them, their face, put them in the back of the car?
I'm not so sure that's the right policy. Any policy we employ, and I know the chief will want to add to this, understand, well, what are we trying to solve?
Right.
There are issues. We have opiate and heroin addiction crisis in this country, in this state. We can't arrest our way out of that policy. When we have gang violence, we're not going to arrest our way out of that policy. Why are young people finding that that's their only opportunity, only hope is to turn to a life of crime? how do our policies impact the environment that lead to those outcomes? What I'm proud about the way we govern and the way we set policy and the way we're policing is we're asking those questions. And the very rank and file police officer is involved in that conversation. If we just set policy from my desk and implement, and we're satisfied, well, our occurrence rates are down and our arrest rates are down, well, we're really not getting the whole picture, are we? Because we've seen, this is generational, we've seen it's embedded in our society, we've seen a recurrence of these incidents, so we need a deeper dive to understand, well, what is the environment we're creating as community and policymakers?
Okay. I know I had provided at least this question. When it comes to data, I had provided this question earlier. How much is the city of Somerville paid out in terms of any lawsuits that have been brought against the police department for, you know, the type of incidents that sparked down in Baltimore?
So in terms of racial complaints, I don't think we've paid anything out. I want to make something clear. We've had, and we encourage residents, if you feel you've not been treated justly or fairly, we want you to file your report or complaint to the police department. That doesn't, but, well, we're not going to rest on our laurels and say, look, we haven't had any lawsuits, Joe, we haven't paid anything. We're not satisfied with that. We're not going to sit here before you and say that hasn't happened, that type of misconduct, because we know intuitively and from growing up here, that did occur. That did occur. So what we want to know is, what are the lessons from Ferguson, from Baltimore, from Staten Island, and there's so many other unreported, media glorified cases in this country that should be educating us as a society.
And I think, you know, one of the things that has become very, very clear is the speed is just breathtaking in terms of social media.
Absolutely.
So both city government and police department can no longer under the rug.
Right.
They can't hide. Phones are everywhere. Surveillance is everywhere. So, you know, maybe there are those who say social media is the ill of our society, and there are those who say it's a tool to use for betterment. And I think when it comes to what we're seeing is that corruption within city government, within police departments, is probably going to go by the wayside because of the scrutiny that the public has at this point. Chief, I want to ask you one question in terms of race relations within the department.
Sure.
So, frame for the general public, you now have a diverse force, men, women, black, white, gay, straight.
Sure.
I mean, they are a mix.
Very reflection of the community.
Right, and you know, I have always said this to the mayor. I give him the credit where credit is due. You know, and he's made an effort in terms of the past chiefs. Sure. Tony Holloway was a man of African American descent. The question I have is, do you perceive that you have any kind of trouble with that rapid integration and diversity within our force?
Within the police department itself, no. I think everyone's working towards a common goal, and that's to provide public safety to the citizens of Somerville and really build legitimacy within the community. I mean, you know, I kind of go back to the statement a lot, but there's really no problems in the community that the police can solve. But there's no problem that the police work with the mayor's office, with city government, that we can't solve as a community. And that's the message from the chief to the command staff, to the captains, right down to the rank and file. I mean, I'm with the officers daily. I'm in the detective bureau, I'm in the traffic unit, and we're speaking to the officers. I mean, we have a collective effort towards serving the community.
And you spent almost your entire career with these folks, so you know them
I know them
intimately.
personally, sure. Yep.
Yeah, and it wasn't always that way. Just like we want to create an environment where anyone in the community can feel comfortable talking to police or their city representatives.
It is about trust, though,
Right.
isn't it?
We have to earn it. We're not going to declare it. You know, how can we get you to trust us, to work with us, to solve issues on public health, public safety, to grow a community? And within the department, it's the same thing. You know, Joe, for 12 years, there were a lot of bad cops we moved out of here. There were any, and people who didn't want to embrace this is how we have to think about policing, and it's been an evolution. And we're not where we want to be yet. And you know, Chief Holloway was great, and you know, having Chief Fallon here, he understands that we're not going to rest on our laurels. We want to be the model how you police, how you become community. And you know, now I believe there's an environment in the police department where people can feel good about coming out about who they are, can feel good about that they can trust their superior and command staff. And we feel great that the department reflects more of what the community is. We've changed the demographics of the department, but we're not done yet.
For both, and either one can take, if you were faced with that situation in Baltimore that the current mayor and the chief of police in Baltimore were faced with, they both got a lot of flack for waiting too long.
Yeah.
And this will follow right into, between the two of you and between the other elected officials and appointed officials in the city. Do we have a plan for if anything like that ever happened here in this city?
So we have an approach to public protest, and I wrote in my article in Commonwealth Magazine, we should be embracing, nonviolent civil disobedience in the spirit of Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. When we care more about the safety of the protesters and the safety of others. So rousing people for exercising their right of free speech and demonstration is contrary to, I believe, the principles in our Constitution.
You took a hit for defending them, too.
Sure.
You took a hit on the blogs
I think we want to be careful that we want to protect property and the protesters.
Right.
And others. Now, I don't want to be Monday morning quarterback and anyone. However, I understand what the mayor wanted to do is to give them space to protest. Up in the Prospectville neighborhood, and Somerville was socially, and at this time, that was going to end up the way it did because the tensions were percolating, for decades there.
It just takes one or two triggers.
One spark.
Right.
One spark.
One or two triggers and it all gets
But
out
our
of control.
approach is, and we showed that this past December when we had a sit-in right in the middle of Davis Square following the incidents in Ferguson and Staten Island. Our approach was we work with the protesters. We don't care about inconvenience. We should hate injustice more than we hate inconvenience, as I wrote. And we care more about their safety.
As long as the inconvenience, though, and I'm going to protect some of the bloggers who went after you, as long as the inconvenience does not threaten the life of other people.
Absolutely. Our approach would be, is people want to be disobedient civilly, and they want to cause inconvenience, we embrace that. If they're going to destroy property, threaten others' safety, or hurt themselves, then we'll step in, but in a non-militaristic, non-violent manner. And I think I could ask the chief to add to that. Sure.
Yeah, I think, very important how we respond. I mean, in a peaceful manner and allow people the opportunity to voice their opinion. I mean, if anybody's, maligned in the community or feels like, they're not receiving justice, I mean, we need to assist them in becoming part of the community, moving towards a community of inclusiveness.
And we've seen it on a much smaller scale here. There have been protests recently where your force has escorted, and provided for the safety of the demonstrators. You'll find nobody who's going to defend, free speech more than I do, but I also have to be very careful in balancing that.
Yeah, sure.
Free speech, I agree with you totally. Free speech does not give you license to destroy property.
And I think when we destroy or harm others, we're really not doing justice, as was said in Baltimore, to the victims of wrongdoing, or to the, just like we're not giving due justice or praising the principles of Martin Luther King when we want to bash the protesters for exercising their right. But, leadership comes from everyone in the circumstances, from those in public safety authority and elected authority, but those demonstrated are leaders in the community, and they have to exercise that leadership smartly.
20 years ago, did you ever demonstrate? Did you ever march in a protest?
I marched in labor protests, sure, but nothing to what I've seen here. So.
Chief?
No, I didn't.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So I won't tell you about my near arrest. But that was eons ago. Yeah. Let's go back to the city of Somerville moving forward. You know that I'm going to do 2 more programs. Both programs will concentrate on the black, non-white immigrant community, and especially in terms of our kids. I've spoken to people over the past couple of days in formatting this, and one thing that came shining through is the breathtaking clarity of these kids get along up at the high school. It's far from the days, the incident that we were discussing about, when there was enormous influx of people from South America, from the Caribbean, from, Western Africa, that were flooding into this city in the 80s and 90s, and that exploded. That exploded because of the time. You had an enormous amount of people who did not speak English, an enormous amount of strife within the high school itself, but to a person. They've described Somerville High School to me as one of the best examples of a multi-racial, multi-ethnic organization that just seems to get along seamlessly.
Right, no,
Is that a fair statement?
I agree. You know, I go back to my first experience, and I know Chief Fallon after me, and what happened in the early 90s. That was a combination of longstanding cultural and racial undertones throughout the region and ignorance. I remember after that fight I described between new Haitian students and white students in the school, I think the result was, look, just get along and get back to class. And, you know, and then you fuel that with continued racial and cultural, negative cultural overtone, and that got worse. You know, over time, what we've developed in some of us an intolerance for injustice and intolerance for not embracing fellow human beings. And we've worked hard, this goes back to Gene Boone, they started the core mediation program, you know, to facilitate an environment where leaders are being cultivated in our school system. These young students, they're leaders. I mean, they're our pride and joy here. And I think we should all blush with that, you know, statement from young students that they feel Somerville High School is this example of how you embrace cultural diversity and ethnicity. However, I would state, as I wrote in Commonwealth Magazine, it's that vigilance that's brought us through, right? That commitment, because it can still happen anywhere.
Yep.
Right? If we fall back and become complacent.
And I also think you know, credit needs to be given to the family units.
Absolutely.
You know, the family units are guiding the youth. The youth are guiding themselves.
Sure.
If you think about it, in the days when we grew up in almost all-white Somerville, you know, these kids are thrown together, and they either have to get along or they have to move on.
Right.
So I think it's much to their credit. We're going to address that issue in depth a little further on into the series. I want to thank both of you because I know your schedules are very, very busy. I understand that it's a sensitive issue, and
Sure.
you know, the chief especially has to be careful while protecting the general public, also protecting the rights of free speech and assembly. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me
Thank you
here
for
in
having
Greater
us.
Somerville.
Thank you, sir.
We'll
Appreciate
see
it.
you soon.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for joining me on this special episode of Greater Somerville. It has been my pleasure to host the mayor of the city of Somerville, Joe Curtatone, and the chief of police, Dave Fallon. That's it for this episode. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Terrific.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.